Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hello everyone. Welcome to lecture 2, Organic Chemistry 1 course. Exceptions to the octet rule. Odd number of electrons, molecule like nitric oxide, NO, total number of electrons, valence electrons, 6 on oxygen, 5 on nitrogen, total of 11 electrons. As we used to, bonding structure, we write NO, then line single bond oxygen. Step number 3, we give octet first to the more electronegative element, so we give oxygen, the rest of needed 6 electrons. We used 8 electrons this way, 6 and 2 electrons here, 8. We have 11 minus 8, so 3 electrons left. We give it to nitrogen. But when we count nitrogen electrons, only 5 electrons. Remember that we have did that before. If it's less than 8 electrons, we give 2 electrons from here. So we have now N double bond O. We have 4 electrons left here, 2 lone pairs. Now nitrogen will have only 4 and 3, 7 electrons. Still we cannot reach actually the 8. Oxygen, okay, 8 electrons. What we can do is again take another 2 electrons, so we will have N triple bond oxygen, 2 electrons on the oxygen, and 1, 2, 3. For this structure, we have 9 electrons on nitrogen and 8 electrons on oxygen. Actually, what we found that the nitrogen oxygen bond length is 115 picometer. It's between the triple bond and double bond. Remember that we have odd electrons always in nitrogen, 1, 2, 3, okay? And when we have odd electron, we call it radical. So this molecule is radical. Another example, less than octet electrons, central element in a molecule with less than 8 electrons, like boron trichloride. Boron in the outer shell, 3 electrons, and for the chlorine we have 7 electrons times 3, so a total of 24. After we make the bonding structure, single bond, single bond, single bond, the step number 3 is to give the more electronegative element its octet. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the chlorine here 8, 8, 8, and we are done with our 24 electrons. Boron has only 6 electrons. A reasonable solution to that is by, again, taking 2 electrons from the one of the chlorine and give it to the bond between the chlorine and the boron. If we did, or if we do so, the formal charge on the most electronegative element will be +1, and the formal charge on boron will be -1. The electronegativity difference is huge between the boron and the chlorine. And actually we found that the boron-chlorine bond has single bond character and showed no double bond character at all, and the distance is 173 picometer. More than an octet of electrons. The molecule like sulfur hexafluoride, valence electron for sulfur, X valence electrons, for fluorine, 6 fluorine, each one has 7 electrons, so the total of 48 electrons. Again, we put the less electronegative element in the middle, then we write the highest electronegative element in the outer place. So we have this structure: sulfur, single bond, single bond, single bond, single bond. Step number 3, give the octet to the outer element. So 6 for each, with these 2 electrons make every one of these 8 electrons. Each fluorine atom has an octet, but the sulfur atom has 12 electrons surrounding it rather than 8. Recall that sulfur has neon configuration and then 3s2, 3p4, 3d0. So it has still part of the p orbital empty, and the d orbitals, the 5 orbitals, are free. So in principle, it could accommodate more than 8 valence electrons by using 1 or more d orbitals. Remember that the d sub shell contains of 5 electrons, 5 orbitals. Each one can accommodate 2 electrons. Another example is the sulfate ion, SO4 2-. Total number of electrons 6 for sulfur, 4 atoms of oxygen, each one 6 electrons plus 2 electrons for the charge, so it makes 32 electrons. Okay. Step 2, make the bonding. Sulfur in the middle and 4 oxygen atom as outer element. The step number 3, give the outer element It's octet, so add 6 to each oxygen. Now you have 8 for 4 oxygen, 4 times 8, so you have the 32 electrons. The oxygen has 8 electrons, sulfur has 8 electrons, so for the first look, we say, okay, that's right, but it is not. Why? Because we have to do the formally charge. Doing this or accepting this structure, we will find that the sulfur has 2 positive charges, and each oxygen has 1 negative charge. Sulfur as an electronegative element with 2 positive is question. It's not accepting. It's not acceptable. But taking 2 electrons and give it to the sulfur, expanding the sulfur valence electrons, leading to this sulfate structure, we will end up with formally charge on sulfur equal to 0, oxygen equal to 0, this oxygen equal to 0, but these two will have each one has -1. And actually this is acceptable Lewis structure for the sulfate ion. Draw Lewis structure of the molecule ICl3. Again, valence electron 1 iodine 7, 3 chlorine, 3 times 7, total of 28. Bonding structure. Iodine in the middle because it's less electronegative than chlorine. Then Cl, Cl, Cl. Give the octet to the outer. So each one of the chlorine will take 6, 6, 6. By doing that, you are using actually 8 times 3. So you use 24 electrons out of 28. So still we have 4 extra electrons. Since the iodine already has only 6, we give 2, and then we give the other 2 to the iodine. And this is acceptable. Why? Because again, iodine has a d orbital and can be used for expansion of the valence electrons. The quantum mechanical model of atom. Lewis de Broglie proposed that all particles could be treated as matter wave with the wavelength lambda given by the following equation. Lambda is equal to Planck's constant divided by mass in kilogram times traveling velocity in meter per second. يعني إن بكل بساطة هو أي جسم بيتحرك ليه ويف. كلام دي بروجلي بيقول نعم. طب إحنا مش حاسين بالويف بتاعنا ليه؟ عشان إحنا وزننا كبير جدا. طب انت حسينا بالويف بتاع الالكترونز لان الالكترونز الماس بتاعته صغيره جدا، فاصبح في قيمه للامدا محسوسه ويف لينث. Erwin Schrödinger proposed the quantum mechanical model based on treating electrons as matter wave. Schrödinger's equation had H BC equal to E BC. البي سي هي عبارة عن حاجة اسمها ويف فانكشن. الهات اتش هي عبارة عن الهاملتونيان اوبريتور. E عبارة عن البايندينج energy of electrons. You will take this in detail in one of your physical chemistry courses. هتتعرضوا للكلام ده بالديتيل في مقررات الكيمياء الفيزيائية. اوكي، احنا بس هنلقي ضوء على هذا علشان نقدر نكمل اللي احنا عايزين نقوله في الاورجانيك كيمستري. السكوير بتاعت الويف فانكشن دي represents the probability of finding an electron in a given region within the atom. بتديني معلومات عن probability بتوع الايه finding the electrons around the atom. An atomic orbital is defined as the region within the atom that encloses where the electron is likely to be 90% of the time. أنا بعمل defining على atomic orbit، هو عبارة عن الريجن الموجود في الأتوم اللي بيتواجد فيه الإلكترون بنسبة تزيد عن 90%. The Heisenberg uncertainty principle states that we cannot know both the energy and position of an electron simultaneously at the same time. Therefore, as we learn more about the electron position, we know less about its energy and vice versa. Electrons have an intrinsic property called spin. An electron can have one of two possible spin value, spin up and spin down. اللي احنا بنقول عليها اس بنص وناقص نص. Any two electrons occupying the same orbital must have opposite spins. يعني لو أنا بتكلم على الأوربت في two electrons يبقى one up التاني down. Representations of orbitals. زي ما احنا قلنا قبل كده ان احنا خلاص هنتعامل مع الالكترون كماتر ويف. فانا لو بصيت هنا ده كانه اللي هي السترينج of guitar. There are points of zero displacement or not that occur along the standing wave. The nodes are marked in red. Since the string in the animation is fixed at both ends, this leads to the limitation that only certain wavelengths are allowed for any standing wave. As such, the vibration are quantized. لاعب الجيتار السترينج بتاعتي بقى ممسوكة في أماكن معينة فيكسد، عشان كده بتطلع فايبريشن لها ساوند. واللي بيلعب على الجيتار بيحرك ايده بيغير النوت دي بحيث ان هو يطلع ويف تانية لها ساوند تاني. لو الالكترونز بيتحرك في حركة دائرية لازم يبدأ وينتهي ويقفل الويف بتاعته. اوكي، يبقى برضو هنا كوانتايز، لان لازم يكون في تردد معين في هذا المحيط. اوكي، لو جينا بقى نبص على ان هو ويف في الايه الاس اوربيتالز. لو انا بصيت على الويف فانكشن او البروبابيلتي اوف فايندينج الكترونز مع الديستانس، هلاقي ان في ال1 اس ادي النواه المرتفع زيرو، يزيد كل ما يبعد لغايه ما يوصل لمنطقه معينه وبعدين ينزل ما يطلعش تاني. في الاور دايركشن في الاكس والواي والزي هو بيزيد مع بعضه وبعدين يختفي، فبيعمل الشكل الايه السفير. The lowest energy orbital 1s is spherical. This indicates that the probability of finding the electrons around the nucleus decreases as we move away from the nucleus in any direction. When the probability function اللي هي احنا قلنا البي to the power 2 for 1s orbital is graphed as a function of the distance from the nucleus, it rapidly approach zero زي ما احنا ايه قلنا هنا. اوكي، طب انا لو عملت الكلام ده هتخيل، يبقى اذا معنى كده ان ال1s هو عباره عن الشكل السفير ده. If we similarly consider 2s and 3s orbital for hydrogen, we find that they are also spherically symmetric. Indeed, all the s orbitals are spherically symmetric. The matter is the matter in which the probability function bc to the power 2 varies with r for the 2s 3s as is shown here. Okay, that's 2s and 2 and 3s. Notice that for 2p orbital, the probability of finding electron goes to 0 and then increase again. See, there is a probability of finding the electron here increase, and then in this area not zero probability, and then we find the electrons once again in this region. Okay, so for 2s we have one knot. In the 3s we have two knots. عشان بس نبسطها على نفسنا كأورجانيك كيمست، بنقول 1s سفير صغير كورة كده بول، بالنسبة ل 2s أكبر منه، بالنسبة ل 3s أكبر. ما بندخلش في تعمق أكتر. برضو مرة تانية ده كورس هتاخدوه في الفيزيكال كيمستري ان ديتيل وللابليكيشن بتاعته. بالنسبة للبي اوربيتال بنلاقي البروبابيلتي بتاعتي ده النيوكليوس، يبقى عندي النيوكليوس فيه نوت، وبعدين في سحابة إلكترونية above the nucleus وbelow the nucleus. خلاص، بنقول عليها ان احنا عندي ايه loops, two loops, one up and one down. Recall that we are making no statement on how the electrons moving within the orbitals. انا ما اتكلمتش عن هو بيتحرك ازاي، انا بيتحرك بقول ال probability of finding the electrons. بالنسبه للبي اوربيتال عندي x وy وz axis عن دي زي، فانا بدل ما ارسم كده سحابه فوق وسحابه تحت بيبسطوها ان انا برسمها ايه تو دامبلز كده في ال 3 dimension. alright، ده بالنسبه للبي. ادي الاس سفير، ادي البي ده في اي مدار هيكون شكله كده، ده الجي اوربيتالز اللي احنا قلنا عليهم 5، وادي ال 7 of F K D B and S. بالنسبة للأورجانيك دايما أتكلم عن الإس والبي، دول هيبقوا عندك هتاخدهم في الإنورجانيك والأورجانوميتاليك courses. See you in next lecture coming soon. Bye bye.